Bellwood was a city of contrasts. Skyscrapers gleamed in the city center, reflecting the sun's brilliance, while the streets of its south side cracked under years of neglect. Luxury boutiques and cafes bustled just miles away from dilapidated schools and overburdened shelters. It was a city shaped by its inequalities, where privilege and prejudice wove an intricate tapestry of injustice. Vanessa Clark embodied a rare success story from this divided city. Born to working-class parents, she grew up in a small apartment where the walls were thin and opportunities thinner. Her father was a factory worker who took pride in teaching her resilience, while her mother, a schoolteacher, instilled in her a passion for knowledge. Vanessa had always been a dreamer, but those dreams were coupled with grit. She earned scholarships, studied computer engineering, and eventually founded Clark Innovations, a tech company focused on uplifting underserved communities through affordable technology and education. Despite her success, Vanessa was no stranger to discrimination. She had learned to steel herself against the sideways glances, the doubting voices questioning her competence in boardrooms, and the occasional condescension wrapped in faux compliments. Her life was a constant battle to prove that she belonged, even though she had already achieved more than most of her critics. On a stiflingly humid Friday afternoon, Vanessa was driving her sleek black sedan back from a community fundraiser. Her car, a status symbol she had purchased not for vanity, but as a reminder of how far she'd come, rolled smoothly through the streets of Bellwood. It was a route she had taken 1,000 times, but that day, something caught her eye. Up ahead, she saw flashing police lights and a scene that made her stomach twist. A young black man stood frozen beside his beat-up sedan, hands raised in submission. His face was a mixture of fear and helplessness as a towering white officer barked orders at him. The officer, Vanessa would later learn his name was Brad Holloway, was visibly agitated. His stance was aggressive, his hand hovering near his holster as if preparing for trouble. Vanessa's heart sank. She knew what she was witnessing wasn't unique. Incidents like this played out daily across the country, many ending in tragedy. Her mind raced. Should she intervene? Would stepping in escalate the situation? But as she watched the young man visibly trembling, her resolve hardened. She couldn't just drive away. Pulling her car to the curb, Vanessa stepped out. She wasn't dressed for confrontation. Her tailored blazer and heels spoke more to corporate meetings than street activism. But she carried herself with the same commanding presence that had earned her respect in boardrooms. As she approached, Brad turned to her, his expression twisting with irritation. "Ma'am, stay back," he barked. "This is police business." Vanessa raised her hands in a show of non-aggression. "I'm not interfering, officer," she said calmly. "Just making sure everything stays civil." Brad's eyes narrowed. Her presence was clearly unwelcome. To him, she was just another know-it-all, civilian sticking her nose where it didn't belong. "I said, step back," he repeated, his tone sharp. Vanessa didn't budge. "I'm within my rights to stand here." "And so is he," she said, nodding toward the young man. "What's he being stopped for?" "None of your concern," Brad snapped. "Get back in your car before you regret it." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. A small crowd had begun to gather, their murmurs growing louder. Some pulled out their phones, sensing that something was about to happen. Vanessa noticed this and felt a strange mix of reassurance and apprehension. If things went south, at least there would be witnesses. "Officer," Vanessa said, her voice steady but firm, "I'm a citizen of this city. I have every right to ensure that this young man is treated fairly." Brad's patience snapped. Years of frustration, fueled by a career in which he felt unappreciated and a personal life marred by failures, bubbled to the surface. He took a step toward her, his face inches from hers. "You think you're better than me because of your fancy clothes and your car," he snarled. "You think your money makes you untouchable?" Vanessa didn't flinch. "This isn't about me," she replied evenly. "It's about him, and about justice." Brad's jaw tightened. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. His next action would be one he could never take back. The young man, whose name Vanessa would later learn was Malik, stood frozen, his hands trembling as they remained in the air. His lips quivered, but he dared not speak. The oppressive weight of Brad's presence was evident in every fiber of Malik's being. Vanessa's heart ached as she recognized the fear in his eyes, a fear she had felt countless times in her own life. Brad Holloway's posture grew more rigid, his frustration spilling over like a boiling pot. The murmurs from the growing crowd only fueled his irritation. To him, this was insubordination, not just from Malik, but from Vanessa, this woman who dared to challenge his authority. She stood unflinching, an immovable force in the face of his escalating rage. "Ma'am, I'm warning you," Brad hissed, his voice low but brimming with venom. "Get back in your car." Vanessa met his glare with a calm that belied the rapid thumping of her heart. "And I'm telling you, officer, I won't step away until you treat him with the respect he deserves." That was the breaking point. Brad, consumed by his own insecurities and prejudices, lashed out. He lifted his boot and, in a moment of unrestrained anger, kicked Vanessa in the shin. The force was enough to knock her off balance, sending her sprawling to the ground. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones that had been pointed at the scene now zeroed in on Vanessa's fallen form. Pain shot up her leg, but Vanessa refused to give Brad the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Slowly, deliberately, she pushed herself back to her feet, her chin high despite the searing sting in her leg. The crowd's murmurs turned into shouts, voices rising in disbelief and outrage. "You've crossed the line," someone yelled. "Is this what justice looks like?" another added. Brad's face flushed, beads of sweat forming on his brow. The realization of what he'd done began to dawn on him, but his pride wouldn't allow him to back down. "Everyone needs to clear out," he barked, his voice cracking under the weight of his panic. "Disperse, or you'll all be arrested for obstruction." Vanessa held up a hand, signaling the crowd to calm. She turned her gaze back to Brad, her voice steady despite the pain radiating through her leg. "You've made a grave mistake, Officer Holloway," she said, "and the world will see it." Brad's gaze darted to the phones pointed at him. He was no longer in control of the situation. The crowd, the cameras, and most importantly, Vanessa, had taken that power from him. Vanessa's strength, even in the face of physical assault, was undeniable. As the crowd continued to grow, so did their demands for accountability. What began as a routine traffic stop had transformed into a moment that would soon capture the attention of an entire nation. Vanessa's words hung in the humid air, a challenge and a promise that reverberated in the hearts of everyone present. Brad Holloway's panic grew as the reality of his actions began to sink in. The crowd wasn't leaving. Their presence was solidifying into an immovable force of witnesses demanding justice. Malik, still frozen in place, lowered his trembling hands cautiously. Vanessa turned to him, her expression softening. "You're safe now," she said, her voice steady. She placed herself firmly between him and Brad, a human shield protecting the young man from further harm. But Brad wasn't ready to relinquish his authority. He reached for his radio, fumbling to call for backup, his voice strained. "I need units at—" "Stop," Vanessa interrupted, her voice slicing through his words with quiet authority. "You're only digging yourself deeper. Let this go. Officer." Brad's hand hesitated over the radio as the weight of his actions pressed down on him. His instincts screamed to double down, but the phones pointed at him told another story. Each recording was a damning testimony to his abuse of power, and his bravado began to crumble under the weight of his guilt and fear. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. 2 squad cars pulled up, and officers emerged, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern as they assessed the scene. One of them, Sergeant Ramirez, approached cautiously, her sharp eyes taking in Vanessa, the crowd, and the visibly shaken Brad. "What happened here?" Ramirez asked, her voice firm but neutral. The crowd erupted into overlapping voices. "He assaulted her. She was just trying to help. We've got it all on video." Vanessa, still standing tall despite her pain, stepped forward. "Sergeant, I'm Vanessa Clark. This officer stopped a young man for no apparent reason and assaulted me when I questioned him. There are multiple witnesses, and everything has been recorded." Ramirez's eyes widened slightly at the mention of Vanessa's name. A billionaire philanthropist, Vanessa's reputation preceded her. Ramirez turned to Brad, who was now visibly sweating. "Is this true, Officer Holloway?" Brad stammered. She was interfering. She wouldn't step back. Ramirez raised a hand to silence him. "Enough. We'll handle this properly." Vanessa nodded, her voice calm but resolute. "I'll be filing a formal complaint, and I'll expect a full investigation. Incidents like this have gone unchecked for too long." As Brad was escorted away, his head hung low. The crowd cheered, not out of joy, but out of relief that someone had stood up against injustice. Malik, still shaken, turned to Vanessa with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "You didn't have to do that." Vanessa placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Yes, I did," she said softly. "We have to stand up for each other, or nothing will ever change." In the days that followed, the video of the incident went viral, sparking nationwide outrage. Vanessa's bravery became a symbol of resistance against systemic injustice, igniting discussions about accountability and the abuse of power. For Vanessa, the ordeal was a reminder of why she had fought so hard to succeed, not for the luxury or the accolades, but to create a world where no one had to endure what Malik or countless others had faced. The road to change was long, but she was ready to walk it one step at a time. Moral of the story: the story teaches the importance of standing up against injustice, even when it's difficult or dangerous. It emphasizes the power of courage, community, and accountability in creating a fairer, more just society.